A white lion cub was born and immediately deemed a curse. Unable to walk, unable to hunt, it was abandoned by its own pride without a sound. When it was found dying in a poacher's trap, its mother made the unthinkable choice. She sought help from a human. And one woman, disgraced and alone, risked everything to save it. But what stunned the world was the final decision the pride made that no lion had ever made before. The morning should have been silent. At that hour, the grand escarpment usually held its breath. The wind slipped carefully between the stone ridges, the sun had not yet burned the mist away, and even the birds waited before testing their voices. It was the kind of quiet that seasoned field workers learn to trust and fear. Amara Cole heard the sound while sterilizing a set of worn surgical tools. It was faint, almost imagined. A thin, broken cry that did not belong to the wind or the rock. It carried pain in it, raw, unfinished pain, and it came from far beyond the safe perimeter marked on every map she owned. Amara froze, her gloved hand hovering in midair. She had worked with injured wildlife for over 15 years, from drought-stricken reserves to overcrowded rehabilitation centers funded by conservation grants and private donors. She knew the difference between fear and instinct. This sound was neither. It was desperation. The radio on the desk crackled softly behind. Her, repeating the same automated warning it had broadcast all week: restricted movement beyond Station Theta, increased risk, authorization required. Authorization was something Amara no longer had. The research outpost she lived in was barely operational. An abandoned biological station repurposed as a monitoring point for endangered species. It sat alone at the edge of the escarpment, a place forgotten by bureaucracy and rarely visited by supervisors. After her suspension, this was where she had been sent, not quite fired, not quite forgiven. She stepped outside. Cold air rushed against her face. The sky was pale gray, the sun still hidden behind stone walls that rose like ancient sentinels. Amara scanned the ridgeline, her eyes adjusting to the shadows. Then she heard it again. Closer this time. A cry, short, weak, and uneven, echoed from the cliffs to the east. Her heart tightened. No adult lion sounded like that. No leopard, no hyena. This was smaller, younger, a life, not yet strong enough to roar. Amara grabbed her field pack without thinking. Inside were basic medical supplies, a thermal blanket, pain management injectables, and emergency rations, the kind often funded by wildlife rescue donations and animal welfare programs. She hesitated only once, glancing back at the radio. If she reported the sound, protocol would delay action for hours. Forms, clearances, risk assessments. By the time approval arrived, whatever was crying would likely be silent. She stepped past the boundary marker. The path narrowed quickly, stone biting into the soles of her boots. As she moved deeper into the escarpment, the air changed. It grew heavier, carrying the metallic scent of blood. Amara stopped and crouched low. There it was. A dark smear dragged across pale rock. Fresh, still wet, not the chaotic spray of a hunt. This was a trail, pulled, not chased. Her pulse quickened as she followed it, every sense alert. She noticed claw marks etched into stone, frantic and uneven. Whatever had made them had struggled and lost. The cry came again, weaker now, almost swallowed by the vastness of the cliffs. Amara reached the edge of a ravine and looked down. Her breath left her body in a slow, stunned exhale. Far below, tangled between jagged rocks and rusted wire, hung a small shape, white, shockingly white against the dark stone. Its body trembled with each shallow breath, one hind leg twisted unnaturally beneath it. Thin strands of wire bit into its pale fur, already stained pink. A white baby lion, albino, rare beyond reason. The kind of animal conservation groups built entire campaigns around. The kind of birth that brought tourists, funding, international attention, and danger. The cub lifted its head weakly and cried again. Amara dropped to her knees. She had seen animals on the brink before. She had learned to read the signs: skin temperature, breathing rhythm, eye response. This cub was running out of time. Dehydration, blood loss, shock, every second mattered. Above her, a low sound rolled through the air. Amara turned slowly. On the opposite ridge stood a lioness. She was massive, her muscles rigid, her tawny coat dulled by dust and dried blood. Her eyes never left the cub below. Not once. There was no aggression in her posture, no warning growl, only a stillness so intense it bordered on unbearable. A mother watching her child die. Amara raised her hands instinctively, lowering herself further, making her body small. She spoke softly, though she knew the lioness could not understand the words. "I see him," she said. "I see him." The lioness did not move, but her tail flicked once, a single, restrained motion, heavy with tension. Amara understood then. This was not a sluichy. This was not an accident of nature alone. Wire did not appear in ravines without reason. Someone had been here. Someone had set a trap and never come back or planned to return later. Poachers? Thought hardened something in her chest. She glanced back at the cub. Its cries had faded into weak gasps. Its chest rose and fell unevenly. If she climbed down now, she risked provoking the lioness. If she waited, the cub would die. Amara made her decision. She reached into her pack and pulled out a climbing line, testing the knots with steady hands. Above her, the lioness let out a low, trembling sound, not a roar, but something closer to a plea. The sun finally crested the stone wall behind them, sending a thin blade of light into the ravine. It caught the cub's white fur, making it glow as if the world itself refused to let it disappear quietly. Amara anchored the rope. As she began her descent, she did not know that this single choice, made without permission, without backup, without any promise of safety, would force an entire pride to confront a rule older than memory. She only knew one thing: if she turned back now, she would carry the sound of that cry for the rest of her life. And she had already lived with enough ghosts. 2 nights earlier, long before the wire cut into pale flesh and cries echoed through stone, the pride had gathered under a sky heavy with stars. The highlands were not a gentle place to raise young. Food was scarce, predators bold, and the cliffs unforgiving to the weak. For generations, this pride had survived by one rule above all others: nothing that endangered the group was allowed to remain. Callie lay apart from the others, her body curved protectively around the smallest shape pressed against her chest. The cub had been born just before dawn. At first there was silence, an unsettling pause that made Callie nudge the tiny body with her nose, her heart hammering. Then came a thin breath, a tremble. Life. When the sun finally touched the den, the other lionesses saw it. White, not pale gold, not dust-lightened tan. White like bone, like moonlight, like something that did not belong. Murmurs rippled through the pride. Some stepped closer, eyes narrowed. Others stayed back, instinctively, as if the color itself carried danger. Albino births were whispered about, never welcomed. They drew attention. They drew humans. They drew death. Callie ignored them all. She licked the cub clean, again and again, as if her tongue alone could color him invisible. His fur was soft, almost translucent, his nose a faint pink, his eyes sealed shut. He mewled weakly, searching for warmth, for milk for her. But when he tried to stand, his hind leg folded beneath him. Callie froze. She nudged him gently. He tried again, and failed again. A low sound escaped her throat, fear, sharp and sudden. The cub's breathing quickened. He dragged himself closer, using only his front paws, his small body scraping against stone. He did not cry loudly. He did not protest. He only tried. That somehow hurt the most. By nightfall, the pride had noticed. Sora arrived without announcement. She was larger than most of the other lionesses, her shoulders broad, her gaze calculating. Since the last dominant male had fallen months earlier, Sora had taken control, not through brute force, but through strategy. She decided where the pride hunted, where it rested, when it moved. Survival followed her choices. She looked down at the cub once, then she looked at Kali. "This one will not last," Sora said, her voice low, carrying easily through the den. Kali bristled, placing her body fully between Sora and the cub. "He is alive," Kali answered. "That is enough." Sora's tail flicked slowly. "He is loud. He is visible. He is broken." The words settled heavily in the air. Other lionesses shifted uncomfortably. One turned her head away, another stared at the cub longer than necessary, as if trying to decide something she did not want to admit to herself. "This land is already watched," Sora continued. "The humans come closer every season, wildlife patrols, research drones, cameras paid for by conservation funding and ecotourism money. A white cub will bring them straight to us." Kali's jaw tightened. "Then we move." "And starve?" Sora countered. "The cliffs give us shelter. The valleys below are claimed by others. You ask the pride to risk everything." Kali did not look away. "I ask you to let him live." Silence followed. The cub stirred, releasing a small, breathy sound. Not a cry, almost an apology. Sora stepped closer. For a moment, Kali thought the leader would strike. Instead, Sora simply looked down, her eyes cold, unreadable. "We will see," she said at last, "if he survives the night." That night stretched long. Kali did not sleep. She counted breaths. She listened to the cub's heart. She shifted her body constantly to keep him warm, even as pain crept into her own muscles. When the cub whimpered, she licked his face. When his breathing faltered, she pressed her nose to his side until it steadied again. At dawn, he was still alive, but his leg had swollen. His movements were slower, his strength fading. Sora called the pride together. There was no roar, no formal challenge, just a quiet circle of bodies, tails brushing stone, eyes heavy with unspoken understanding. Decisions like this were never loud. "The cub cannot travel," Sora said. "He cannot hunt. He cannot run." Kali felt the words like blows. "He will grow stronger." "Or he will slow us down," Sora replied, "and something else will kill us all." A younger lioness spoke up, voice uncertain. "What if we hide him? Keep him silent until—" Sora cut her off with a look. "There is no hiding white fur." Kali's chest burned. She could feel the eyes of the pride on her, not cruel but distant, measuring, calculating loss. That was when she noticed the movement behind them. 2 male lions stood at the edge of the group, one older, scarred, uninterested, the other younger, lean, his mane still uneven. He watched Kali, not the cub. His gaze held conflict. Sora followed Kali's eyes and stiffened. "We decide now," Sora said sharply, "before weakness decides for us." No one spoke. Kali pressed her forehead to the cub's small head. She breathed in his scent, committing it to memory. She could already feel the future narrowing around them, closing like a trap. Then Sora turned away. "We move at sunset," she announced. "This den will be abandoned." Kali's heart dropped. Move. Without him. That was when it happened. When the pride dispersed, when the shadows grew long and the air cooled, Kali woke to a sound that ripped her from sleep. The cub was gone. No cry, no struggle. Just empty stone where his body had been. Kali surged to her feet, panic exploding through her veins. She circled the den, nose to the ground. There, scrape marks, dragged, not by hyena, not by leopard, by lion. Her roar tore through the cliffs, raw and broken, echoing into the dark. And somewhere beyond the den, unseen and unheard, the first link in a chain of impossible choices tightened. The trail was not made in panic, it was deliberate, quiet, and cruel. Callie followed it through twisted roots and dry brush, her paws landing silently on earth that no longer felt like home. She moved as if pulled by a string knotted to her chest, each step driven not by hope, but by the refusal to stop. The sun was barely over the horizon when she reached the first sign of blood. It was not much, a smear on a rock already drying, clinging to a tuft of white fur snagged on thorn. The air shifted. The world fell into a deeper kind of silence, the kind that came just before something broke. Callie moved faster now. Her breath shortened, chest heaving. The scent of her cub hung faintly in the air, laced with dust and something older, metallic, unnatural. She crossed through gullies and across ledges, ignoring the pain in her legs and the tightness building in her shoulders. She didn't know where she was going, only that her cub had been taken from her, and someone, within the pride, had done it. By midday, the cliffs opened. It was a wound in the earth, deep and narrow, framed by stone walls carved by time. Locals called it the throat of stone, and even the bravest lions avoided it. Its jagged mouth swallowed light, and wind moved strangely through it, howling like voices that had forgotten how to leave. Callie paused at its edge. Then she heard it. Faint, strangled, a single broken whimper that froze her blood. She peered over the rim and saw him. Her cub dangled 10 feet below, tangled in rusted wires stretched between 2 stone pillars. The makeshift trap was old, perhaps meant for smaller prey, or maybe left by poachers who had stopped caring about precision. The wire had wrapped around the cub's belly, slicing into the soft flesh of his side. Blood stained the fur in jagged lines. One leg dangled limp, barely twitching. Callie growled, a deep guttural sound that rolled from her chest. She paced the ledge, searching for a way down, but the sides of the ravine were sheer. Any attempt to climb would collapse the brittle rock, or worse, fall directly onto her cub. The cub shifted slightly, and the wire tightened. He whimpered again, softer now. Callie pressed her forehead to the ground. She could not reach him. The world spun. Her tail lashed. She roared into the pit, a sound filled with rage and helplessness. Then she stopped. Her ears twitched. From the shadows across the ravine, 2 yellow eyes blinked. A leopard, alone, lean, and hungry. Its coat was scarred, and one ear was torn. An outcast, perhaps, just like her. It had likely been following the blood trail, waiting, watching. The moment Callie left or made a mistake, it would pounce. She turned to face it, baring her teeth. The leopard did not move. It didn't need to. Time was on its side. Callie backed away from the ledge and crouched low, placing her body between the ravine and the waiting predator. Her heart raced. Every instinct screamed to charge, to claw, to end the threat. But she couldn't leave the cub. She couldn't risk the fall. The leopard tilted its head, curious. Then it disappeared into the rocks, not retreating, circling. Callie knew it would return. Night was coming, and with it, the cold. The cub wouldn't survive the drop in temperature, not with his injuries. She had hours, maybe less, before his body gave out or something worse arrived. She looked to the sky. The sun hovered low, softening the edges of the cliffs. The air thickened with heat and silence. Far above, vultures circled lazily, as if sensing what the earth was about to lose. Callie walked a tight spiral near the ravine's edge, marking the territory with strong, sharp scent. A warning, a boundary, a promise of violence to any who crossed it. But it would not be enough. She needed help. Her eyes lifted toward the eastern ridge. The humans. She had never approached them before. The pride avoided the research. Stations and field tents. Too many stories. Some ended in cages, others in dart guns, and some never ended at all. But Kali remembered what she had seen once, from a distance, a human kneeling beside a wounded jackal, wrapping its leg in white cloth. The jackal had lived. That same scent lingered in the wind now. Alcohol, latex, metal. It led to the place where the cliffs ended and strange towers rose. Kali made her choice. She looked back once at her cub. He had stopped moving. Only the faintest rise and fall of his chest remained. She turned and ran. The path was sharp and narrow. Rocks cut into her paws. Thorns tore at her sides. Her lungs burned. But she did not stop. When she passed the place where the leopard had been, she let out a roar so fierce it shook the birds from the trees. It was a sound not of challenge, but of warning. "Touch him, and I will return for you." She kept running. The wind turned warm. The ground flattened. Strange smells filled the Yao Turum. Air, rubber, plastic, something electric. The human outpost was close. She could feel it. Behind her, the ravine waited. So did the cub, and somewhere in the growing darkness the leopard crept forward, patient as the grave. The sun was almost gone when Amara reached the edge of the ravine. Her shirt clung to her back, soaked with sweat, and the wind that met her face smelled of copper, stone, and something else. Grief, maybe, or fear. The rope in her hands cut into her palms as she checked the knots again, though she'd already tied them twice. Below her, the white cub hung in silence. He had stopped crying. That silence terrified her more than any sound ever could. She scanned the scene again, noting the depth of the drop, the jagged rocks lining the bottom, and the tension in the old poacher's wire that held the cub suspended like a marionette mid-fall. The longer it held, the more likely it would snap, or slice through. Amara crouched low, careful not to dislodge loose stone. She had no climbing gear beyond her rope, no backup, no radio signal. The station had gone dead miles ago, and even her emergency beacon blinked uselessly in her pack. Still, she moved, because the only thing worse than dying here was living with herself if she didn't try. She secured one end of the rope to a stable boulder and began her descent. Each step downward brought her closer to the smell of blood. It was thick now, soaking into the stone. The cub's fur had gone dull, matted. His breathing was shallow. His tiny mouth hung open slightly, lips dry and pale. The wound around his belly had begun to swell, angry and red. "Hey," she whispered, voice barely above the wind. "Hey, I'm here." His eyes didn't open. Amara reached out, her hand trembling, and touched the wire. It vibrated slightly under her fingers, still holding, barely. She pulled out a small multi-tool, flipped the blade, and began to saw gently, slowly, whispering as she worked. "You're okay. Just a minute more." She didn't hear the growl, but Kali did. Above them, the lioness had returned. Her paws hit the ground so hard that dust rose behind her. Her flanks heaved, her mouth foamed slightly. From exertion, but her eyes were fixed on Amara and her child. For a long breath, she stood motionless. Then her gaze shifted. To the side, to the rock just beyond the ravine. The leopard stepped into view, low and lean, its tail twitching with anticipation. It had been waiting for the human to leave or fall, but now it saw the lioness had returned, and its window was closing. Kali roared. The sound was no longer desperation. It was war. Amara jerked as the sound exploded above her, nearly losing her footing. The blade nicked the wire, and sparks of panic flashed in her chest. She couldn't look up. She couldn't stop. She cut faster. The leopard lunged. Kali met it midair. Claws scraped claws. Fur flew. The two cats slammed into the stone, tumbling dangerously close to the edge. Amara felt the rock tremble beneath her. She yelled, but the wind stole her voice. She severed the wire. The cub fell into her arms with a thud that knocked the air from her lungs. His body was too light. He didn't move. She cradled him tightly, one hand beneath his head, the other under his belly. Blood seeped into her shirt. Above, the lioness and the leopard clashed again. Callie struck first, her paw catching the smaller predator's side. The leopard twisted, bit down on her shoulder. Callie screamed in pain and rolled, trying to throw him off. Amara climbed. One arm wrapped around the cub, the other pulled. Her legs scrambled for purchase, boots slipping on the loose gravel. She could hear them above, snarling, gasping, growling. The scent of blood was everywhere now. She crested the ledge just as Callie delivered a final blow. The leopard collapsed, chest rising once, then still. Callie stood over it, trembling, her side torn open and bleeding heavily. She turned toward Amara, swaying slightly. Amara didn't move. For a long moment, the two locked eyes. The cub whimpered in Amara's arms. Callie took one step forward. Amara braced, unsure what would happen. But the lioness did not attack. She came close, so close Amara could feel the heat of her breath, and lowered her head toward the cub. Then she did something Amara would never forget. Callie licked the woman's wrist. Just once, a soft, almost reverent gesture. Then she laid down beside her child and placed a paw over his small body. Amara exhaled slowly. She unzipped her pack and pulled out a syringe of diluted lidocaine. She hesitated, then reached toward the cub's wound. Callie did not stop her. The lioness watched every move, but didn't flinch. Amara cleaned the edges of the cut, applied the antiseptic, and injected a small amount of the pain reliever. The cub stirred weakly, eyes fluttering. Callie made a sound low in her throat, a sound of relief. The sun dipped below the cliffs, casting long shadows over the trio. Night would come fast. Amara knew they couldn't stay here. Not without shelter. Not with predators still lurking, drawn by blood. But the cub wouldn't survive being carried miles back to the station without rest. She looked around and spotted a shallow crevice beneath an overhang. Carefully, she led Callie and the cub to it. Inside, she laid down a foil blanket, the kind used in emergency response situations, and covered the cub. Callie curled around him, her body forming a protective wall of heat. Amara sat just outside the entrance, her back against the stone, knees pulled to her chest. Somewhere in the dark, the radio in her pack clicked. A weak signal, not enough for help, but maybe enough for a message. She flipped it on. The voice crackled. Something about funding, donations for wildlife rescue, partnerships with animal insurance providers, and ecotourism grants, automated nonsense built into the system. She turned it off. Behind her, the lioness breathed steadily. The cub slept soundly for the first time. Amara leaned her head back and stared at the stars. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring. No plan, no orders. But tonight at least, a mother had found her child, and a broken healer had remembered why she once chose to fight for lives that couldn't speak for themselves. The morning came without birdsong. Gray light spilled across the escarpment like ash, soft and cold. Amara opened her eyes to the sound of steady breathing beside her. Callie had not moved. Her body remained curled tightly around the cub, both of them still coated in blood, dust, and exhaustion. But the cub was alive. His breathing was stronger now, though still shallow. When Amara gently pulled back the foil blanket, she saw that the swelling around the wound had begun to ease. The makeshift bandage held. It wasn't perfect, but it had bought them time. Callie lifted her head and looked at her. No sound, just that unwavering stare, full of something Amara couldn't name. Not gratitude, not trust, something older. They had survived the night, but the danger was far from over. Amara stood slowly and stretched. Her body ached from sleeping against stone, her shoulders sore from carrying the cub's weight. She looked out from the crevice. The path ahead remained unclear, and the Edo leopard's blood had not yet dried. They had to move. Amara walked a slow perimeter, checking for signs of scavengers. She found none, but in the distance, just beyond the rise of a hill, something shifted in the dust, shadows moving in sync. She froze. Lions, 6 at least, maybe more, cresting the hill like ghosts returning to claim what was theirs. Amara stepped back quickly and returned to the den. Kali was already standing. She had seen them too. The cub stirred beneath her, trying weakly to lift his head. Kali nudged him once, then turned and walked to the mouth of the shelter. Her shoulders squared. Her jaw tightened. She would not run. The lions came into full view moments later. Sora was at the front, her expression unreadable, her stride as fluid as it was deliberate. Behind her walked 2 older females and the lean young male from before. None carried aggression in their gait. Not yet, but none slowed either. They reached the crevice and stopped. Sora's gaze swept over Amara, then Kali, then the cub lying between them. Her eyes narrowed. "You should have stayed gone," she said. Kali didn't move. Amara instinctively stepped in front of the cub, her body tense, her mouth dry. She didn't know if the lions would attack, but she couldn't let them come closer. Not now. Sora took 1 step forward. "The cub is weak, still broken." Kali growled low in her throat. Sora ignored it. She glanced once more at the cub, then back at the pride. Her voice rose, not a shout, but a statement meant to be heard. "A lion who cannot walk, cannot hunt. A lion who draws humans with his color, draws death. This one will bring disaster." Amara shook her head. "He's healing." Sora looked at her coldly. "You don't belong here." "I didn't ask to," Amara said. "But I'm here, and so is he." The silence that followed was different, heavy. It settled into the air like a coming storm. Then Sora turned her gaze back to Kali. "You were warned," she said. "You chose exile. You chose this human. You chose to protect something that should not have survived. And now you expect the pride to carry your mistake?" Kali took 1 step forward. She didn't roar. She didn't posture. She only stood there, blood still dried on her coat, her ribs visible beneath her skin. But in her eyes burned something ancient, something unshakable. The young male stepped forward. All eyes turned. He was quiet, smaller than the other males, still growing into his role, but his eyes were sharp, thoughtful. He looked at Kali, then the cub, then at Sora. "She didn't ask for help," he said. "She came back to bury her child, that's all." Sora frowned. "And yet the child lives." "Because she saved him," he replied. "Because she fought for him, alone." No one spoke. Then one of the older lionesses took a step back, not toward Sora, but away from her. A subtle shift, a whisper of doubt. Sora's eyes flared. "This pride survives by rules," she hissed. The young male met her gaze. "Then maybe it's time the rules remembered mercy." Sora stared at him, then turned her back. "Walk away," she ordered. "All of you." No one moved. For a breathless moment, the pride hung between futures. Then Kali nudged the cub gently, helping him rise. His legs trembled. He could not stand long, but he looked up, at Amara, at the lions, at the world. Amara felt it like a jolt, the sheer will in that tiny, broken body. Sora saw it too. She stepped forward suddenly, and for a second Amara thought she would strike. But instead, Sora lowered her head and sniffed the cub. Then she turned and walked, without another word. The others followed, slowly, hesitantly. But they followed, except one. The young male stayed behind, his eyes meeting Amara's just once. Then he looked at Callie, and without a word lowered himself beside her. The pride was split. And so the sun rose over a new order, not declared, not agreed upon, but inevitable. Exile had ended, but not by permission, by proof, by a mother's blood, a human's hands, and a cub's breath that refused to stop. The land had changed by morning. Rain had come during the night, brief but harsh, painting the dry stone in slick, treacherous sheen. Mud clung to Amara's boots as she helped guide Callie around the base of the cliffs, her hands stiff with cold and her breath visible in the thinning air. The cub, now swaddled in a cut strip from Amara's emergency tarp, lay across her arms, silent but breathing. He was heavier than he'd been, not much, but enough to give her hope. Callie walked beside her without sound, her pace cautious but determined. The lioness limped now, her side torn from the fight with the leopard, but she never once fell behind. They had no plan, no direction beyond a way. Amara knew returning to the outpost wasn't an option. The radio tower was damaged, and the terrain back toward the ranger road would take them too close to Sora's territory again. Besides, the cub couldn't survive that distance. Not yet. So she aimed for the valley. It was rough country, thick with thorn, carved by dry stream beds and steep ledges. But somewhere at its center lay an old ranger's cache, once used during wildlife migration studies. It was built into the base of a stone hill and equipped with basic supplies: solar lighting, water filtration, satellite uplink. Not much, but enough. She only hoped it hadn't been scavenged. By midday, their progress had slowed. The cub stirred more often now. He lifted his head when Amara whispered to him, even licked a few drops of water from her fingers. But his back leg remained limp, and his skin was hot to the touch. Callie grew restless. She kept glancing behind them, pausing to scent the wind. Amara couldn't smell it yet, but the lioness's body said what her voice could not. Something was following. They rested briefly in the shadow of a thorn tree. Amara sat with her back against the trunk, cradling the cub. Callie stood guard a few feet away, ears forward, tail twitching. Amara's muscles ached. Her stomach growled. But the pain didn't matter. What mattered was keeping them all alive long enough to reach that shelter and hoping the satellite signal was strong enough to send coordinates. She thought of how quickly things had changed. Just days ago, her world was paperwork, sterile gloves, and the quiet shame of suspension. Her license to practice had been restricted following an incident with an endangered tiger overseas. The paperwork had called it unauthorized intervention. She had called it saving a life. Now she was here, with a lioness and her albino cub, in the middle of nowhere, hunted by silence. She didn't regret it. The sun began to dip again. Shadows stretched across the valley like reaching fingers. Amara rose, adjusted the sling around her shoulder, and nodded to Callie. They moved on. Just before dusk, the ground began to shift beneath them, sinking subtly, becoming softer. Callie stopped and sniffed. Amara scanned the horizon. A river. It wasn't wide, but it was fast. Swollen by the night's rain, its brown current foamed as it collided with stones and roots. On the far side, she could see the rise of the hill she remembered. The ranger shelter was just beyond it. They were close, too close to turn back. Amara looked for a crossing. Callie walked the bank, eyes sharp. At one spot, a fallen log stretched halfway across, slick but stable. If they could get across before dark, they could rest, finally, in safety. Amara tested the log. It held. She turned to Callie. "We go together." Callie didn't move at first, then slowly she stepped forward. Amara took the lead, balancing carefully with the cub pressed against her chest. The log wobbled once, but held. Halfway across, the current surged below, cold spray hitting her face, making her stumble. Behind her, Callie growled. Amara turned and saw what Callie had smelled. On the opposite bank, emerging from the brush, came a dark shape, a lone hyena. It stopped and stared. Then another appeared. Then 3 more. They had been tracking the scent of blood. Callie snarled, low and long. Amara quickened her pace. The cub whimpered softly, sensing her tension. As she reached the end of the log, her boot slipped, but Callie was there, catching her with her body and guiding her onto the bank. The hyenas watched, not attacking, waiting. Callie stepped forward and roared, deep, thunderous, primal. The sound echoed through the valley. The hyenas did not move, but they didn't come closer either. Amara led the way up the hill. Callie followed, her muscles coiled tight, never turning her back to the threat. At the top, nestled between 2 boulders, stood the ranger's cache, still intact. She nearly wept. Amara keyed in the override code and pushed the door open. Inside, the air was stale but dry. She laid the cub down gently on a thermal mat, checked his pulse, then turned to Callie. The lioness did not enter. She stood outside, staring, into the dusk. The wind carried the hyena's laughter now, distant, shrill, hungry. Amara stepped beside her. "We're safe here," she whispered. "For tonight." Callie didn't move, but after a long pause, she finally lay down just outside the door, her eyes never leaving the darkness. Amara went inside, activated the solar panel, and sent out a single beacon ping. Location, South Ridge Cache. Status, active urgent, wildlife rescue. Medical assistance needed. Attached file. 1 white lion cub. Critical. She hit send, then sat beside the cub, running her hand gently down his spine. The world outside was dangerous, unfair, brutal. But inside this shelter, for just 1 night, a mother, her wounded child, and the woman who refused to let them die, would rest. And when the sun rose again, they would continue. Together. By dawn, the air had shifted, not in temperature, but in tension. The valley no longer whispered with distant threats. It waited. Amara felt it as soon as she stepped outside the shelter, the ground dry under her boots, the light sharp and colorless. Callie stood already at the ridge, eyes locked to the horizon, her tail flicking once every few seconds. She hadn't slept. Amara followed her gaze. Far below, approaching slowly in the golden light, came the pride. They moved in a formation that was too silent to be casual. First came Sora, her stride as steady and unapologetic as always. Then 2 of the older lionesses flanked her, lean and scarred from years of survival. And behind them, Amara's breath caught, the younger male who had defended Callie before. He wasn't at the center, but he wasn't hidden either. They weren't just visiting. This was judgment. Amara turned and glanced at the cub inside, still wrapped in tarp and thermal matting. He had slept better during the night. His breathing was steadier. When she'd touched his ear earlier, he'd twitched and tried to lift his head. But he still couldn't stand. And in the world he'd been born into, that meant everything. Callie remained motionless as the pride climbed the ridge. When they reached the edge of the clearing, she stepped forward, not aggressively, but with certainty. She stood between them and the shelter, body worn, but eyes sharp. Sora looked at her for a long time. Then she spoke. "You knew we would come." Callie didn't respond. "You knew the moment you returned with him." Still, Callie said nothing. But her presence answered for her. She had come back not to beg, not to explain. She had returned with something far more dangerous. Proof that a cub could survive without strength, that a lioness could defy the law and live, that the rules the pride had followed for generations might no longer be the only way. Sora paced slowly along the edge of the hill, her steps carving a circle. The others followed at a distance, watching, measuring. "This isn't about punishment," she said. "It's about choice." She turned to face the others. "We are hunted, watched, pressured from all sides, and now a white cub lives among us, a cub who cannot walk, a cub who draws eyes from above." Amara shifted where she stood. Every instinct told her to speak, to defend the cub, to tell them about ethics, about conservation, about how in the human world we protect what is rare. But this wasn't her world. This was theirs. Sora's voice rose. "We survive because we are ruthless when we must be. We abandon what endangers us. We do not carry weakness." She paused. "But maybe you've changed." She looked to the others. "Then choose." Silence. Amara held her breath. The older lionesses stepped forward first. One looked at Kali, then to Sora, then back again. Her tail flicked once. Then she walked to Kali's side, not close, but not opposite. Another lioness followed, then the young male. He didn't hesitate. He moved directly to the shelter entrance and lay down in front of it. A guardian? Sora watched him, unreadable. "This isn't what we are," she said, quieter now. "No," the young male replied. "It's what we're becoming." Sora stood still, long enough that the wind seemed to pause with her. Then she walked forward, past Kali, past the others, to the cub. He had woken. His pale eyes watched her without blinking. His chest rose and fell with effort, but he did not look away. Sora lowered her head and sniffed him. He made a small sound. Not fear. Something else. Recognition. Sora stepped back. "I won't carry him," she said, "but I won't stop you from trying." Then she turned and walked away. No order, no dismissal, just choice. And one by one, the pride followed, except for the young male who remained at the shelter. Amara sat beside him as the sun rose higher. "Do you have a name?" she asked. He didn't answer, but he stayed. And somewhere in the middle of the wild, without ceremony, a pride changed. Not by vote, not by fight, but by the quiet weight of what could no longer be denied. The cub was still broken, but he wasn't alone. The sky turned gold before it turned blue. Soft light broke over the shelter's roof as Amara stepped outside, her boots sinking slightly into the damp soil. Morning mist clung to the rocks like breath still being held. The young lioness from the pride, the one who had first stepped away from Sora, stood at the edge of the clearing. She said nothing, no sound, just watched the horizon, waiting. Inside, the cub stirred. Kali hadn't moved much during the night, her body pressed around her son like a shield the world couldn't breach. Amara knelt beside them, brushing her fingers lightly across the cub's flank. Warm, still rising and falling, a little stronger now. The pain meds had worn off. He whimpered faintly, eyes fluttering open. Amara saw the spark there. Confusion first, then recognition, and finally that small, stubborn will that had carried him this far. He tried to stand. Kali shifted, helping him with her snout. His front legs planted. The back leg, still, twisted slightly, dragged behind him. He growled at it, a pitiful, frustrated sound, and tried again. This time he rose. Not fully, not cleanly. But he stood. Amara's throat closed. He took one step, then another. Kali stayed beside him the whole time, her head near his shoulder, nudging gently whenever he faltered. And then he walked to the door, slowly, unsteadily, but on his own. Outside, the pride had returned. Not all of them. Just a half circle of lionesses, sitting low in the grass, watching. The young male from before stood at the front, his eyes on the cub. Amara opened the shelter door. The cub paused in the threshold, blinking in the light. Then he stepped out. Callie followed. The moment held. The lionesses stood. The young male stepped forward. For a breath, everything stilled. Then the cub stumbled. He collapsed forward, too tired to hold himself up. Callie lowered her head, but before she could move, the young male reached him. He didn't growl, didn't sniff. He just lay down beside the cub, close enough that their sides touched. The cub lifted his head, confused, and the pride moved. Not fast, not in a rush. One lioness stepped forward and circled behind him. Another came close and lay beside Callie. The half circle closed, not around, but with. A formation that was no longer defensive. It was something else. Amara watched it happen. They had chosen. Not because the cub was strong, not because he had proved himself capable, but because somehow in his weakness he had reminded them of something older than instinct, something older than rules, a life that refused to go quietly. Amara sat down, her back against the outer wall of the shelter. The cub nestled between Callie and the young male now, his breath slowing again in comfort. Sora hadn't returned, but she no longer needed to. The decision had already been made. The impossible choice, the one no pride in this region had made before, had unfolded not in defiance, but in quiet steps. One paw at a time, a lioness's loyalty, a stranger's mercy, a cub's breath that would not stop. Amara looked up at the rising sun. Her field tablet buzzed quietly on the floor beside her. A notification blinked on screen. Signal confirmed. Ranger dispatch en route. Estimated arrival, 90 minutes. She smiled. For the first time in months, she didn't feel suspended between shame and protocol. She didn't feel like a mistake the system had buried. She felt like someone who had made something right. She stood and took one last look at the pride. The cub slept, tucked tightly between the heat of his mother and the lion who had stepped forward when no one else did. Around them, the circle held firm. She turned back into the shelter and began to clean up. The signal would bring help, maybe even press, maybe donations to rebuild the station, maybe funding for wildlife rescue. Someone in Nairobi or Cape Town or Washington would turn this story into a report, a case study, a headline. They wouldn't know the whole of it. They wouldn't hear the whimper in the cliff, or feel the heat of Callie's breath on their hand, or watch a pride rewrite its law in silence. But they would know this: a white cub had survived, and because of him others might too.